Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sky Matthews, Chief Technology Officer for IBM's Watson Internet of Things.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for attending today. I really appreciate having some of your time. Also, thank you to SAE for inviting me to talk at the conference. Always fantastic to be back in Detroit here at the Cobo Center. So what I'm going to talk about is AI, and in particular, some of the perceptions and change in perceptions that we're starting to see, in society around AI, and what implications that has on us as an industry, and what can we do to start sort of mitigating those perceptions. So, I'm sure everybody's heard of the old AI winter that happened in the late 80s and early 90s after some of the early promises of artificial intelligence did not pan out, perhaps as expected. And so we went into a period of sort of long funk where AI was really, not a topic of interest, and a lot of the investment and research money was, shifted elsewhere. Question as we see some of these kind of negative, reactions and negative press is, are we in danger of facing another AI winter? And just to cut to the chase, I think the answer is no, right? We've come too far. There is, too many clear benefits, too many examples of AI working. In fact, we interact now with artificial intelligence in some form or another, regularly throughout our day, many times without even knowing it. So it is entrenched in our lives already, and will only become more so. But with that said, there are certainly some issues, and there is, no doubt to me that we are facing some backlash against AI, particularly in automotive around some of the, early promise of autonomous self-driving cars that, quite frankly, I think is going to take longer than most of us, maybe, or the industry sort of thought a couple of years ago. So I think there is certainly a danger that society, that consumers, pull back and have a negative reaction, again, unless we start doing something to mitigate that. So these are just a sort of sampling of some of the headlines that I've pulled off, various articles I've read in the past couple of years, and this is just a small sample. So, I have certainly seen a negative trend in the press around artificial intelligence, and even in cases where, sometimes the press is neutral or positive, there's still a sort of tendency to present AI in the old science fiction mode of, Terminator and so on, and when is the AI going to destroy the world? That is not at all helpful to us, trying to engage consumers around accepting AI and getting confidence in AI-based systems. So we have a ways to go yet in terms of, how we actually incorporate AI and make society on the whole comfortable with AI in our systems. And that really touches sort of the whole life cycle of building cars. And I'll give you some practical examples of how AI is being used in development of cars today, because it's being used in a lot of different places. We tend to think immediately of autonomous driving, but there's just a ton of other applications of artificial intelligence that in a lot of ways are more real, more pragmatic, and help sort of smooth that transition to ultimately, more intelligent autonomous systems. So, I think the bottom line is that, we are going to see autonomous systems. We are going to get, AI into our lives in vast scale over the next few years. Maybe not quite as fast as everybody thought just a couple of years ago. So I think it's going to take a little bit more, particularly as you see, some of these press around things like the Boeing 787 and other autonomous systems, crashing and causing loss of human life. There is naturally going to be a press focus on that, and is going to cause some negative reaction. So we have to be very aware of that. we have to do what we can to mitigate the effect of that. It is inevitable that these systems will be involved in crashes. So, we as an industry have to take proactive steps around, how we message around the application of AI, both now, and going forward. And we have to take practical steps on making AI more trustworthy. So I'll mention a little bit about that, but I just came across this article yesterday about, the other issue, of course, is that once AI systems become prevalent, people will, try to undermine them. Stupid as that may be, people will actively try to undermine these systems. And today that is incredibly easy to do. So we also have to think about, how to protect them better and make them, more, reliable against even in the face of active attacks of various forms. So just a few of the issues, to peel back that onion and talk about what are the obstacles, what are the issues that we're seeing. Number one is just the hype and maybe the over-optimism that was prevalent, even a couple of years ago, and still is, from certain corners today. So, I still see over-promising of, level 5 autonomy in, 2 years' time or whatever. I just don't believe it. That is not practical. And if we go too quickly without taking some of these other issues into account, we're really going to drive ourselves into another AI winter because, there will be an incredibly adverse reaction to that, and or you'll trigger just an incredible amount of legislative oversight on autonomous systems, which will also slow things down. And even, in fact, another article, which I'll get to, I just found yesterday, that is starting to happen. So that's something we're going to have to deal with as well. The thing that maybe worries me the most is what I call the sort of magic box syndrome. Even as experts in the field, we don't know 100%, down to the bit level, how AI even works. And so it's a little bit difficult, even for people with very strong technical backgrounds, to actually know what's realistic, where the limits are. That's incredibly difficult for the average, public consumer who's been brought up with, AI and science fiction and in media for years now. So, being more clear about what those capabilities are and where the sort of boundaries are on those capabilities today, tomorrow, 12 months' time, is extremely important for us, particularly as engineers, right? It's really on us as an engineering community to absolutely clearly understand what AI is capable of, where it's applicable, where it's not applicable, what those boundaries are, and then what some of these other issues are that, as engineers building intelligent systems, we have to consider during that engineering process. So one of those is explainability. And this has been an issue with deep neural networks, the sort of heart of most learning intelligent systems. It turns out that once you add a few layers into a neural network, it becomes extremely difficult to understand how it's reasoning, how it does identification or classification through that neural network layer. Very tough to explain, why and how it came to its decisions. And so, that's a very, very big challenge that the industry needs to deal with. We're starting to see some steps towards that, and I'll give a couple of examples, but a big problem. Even the sort of father of neural networks, Geoffrey Hinton, said I didn't think that was possible. Now, I certainly think it is possible, and there are a number of tools out there that are starting to make it possible to sort of identify exactly how an AI algorithm came to its decision. But it really has to be done consciously. And the next major problem is training, and this is why I don't think level 5 autonomy at a sort of large scale is feasible within the next couple of years, because even though we've got autonomous cars driving roads today in many different conditions, the range of conditions that an AI would have to see repeatedly multiple times in order to actually learn how to deal with is just almost endless. So as an example, and anybody here from Michigan will appreciate this, so I grew up in Canada. In the wintertime, where I grew up, it's very common to get a heavy snowfall, a foot of snow on the road's warm, the snow starts to melt, and then sun goes down, everything starts to freeze. And so you get this layer of slushy snow on the road, covered in a nice crisp layer of ice. Well, driving on that is a hell of a thing to do, and it takes some experience and takes some learning. I remember one time driving a very light car on a highway like this, and I literally had to figure out how to kind of surf the car off these piles of slush in order to keep it straight. There is no way that an AI in the next 2 years is able to deal with that. So, that's why I just don't think that we, as much exposure as we've got yet with autonomous systems, we're not there for them to handle all road conditions and those kinds of things in the near future. One day, no doubt. The other thing is bias. I'll just play a short video to talk about bias in AI. So, no doubt, bias exists. It's prevalent. It's prevalent in our data as well, and we train AI from data. So it's not surprising that bias that's in our data is sort of creeping into AI-based systems because they just learn from the data. But there are steps that we can take to mitigate that. IBM recently launched a tool called Watson OpenScale, which among other things actually helps assess and helps sort of mitigate bias in machine learning algorithms. So, and we're not the only tool, there are other ones. So there are ways to mitigate that. In addition, so I've got sort of 4 major themes of how can we actually move forward and sort of address this potential backlash against AI, do things practically. The first is actually what I call narrow focus AI. So the sort of public perception of AI, again, is based on robots that talk and think and stuff like that. And that level of what we call artificial and general intelligence is just, we're nowhere near that. It's not practical. Today's AI is very narrow, very specific, and so finding those specific applications of where AI is good is really key to making progress in the next 6, 12, 18 months. And I'll show a couple of examples of that. AI can be extremely helpful. We already see that with some of the intelligent assistants that are out there today, and I think we've just barely scratched the surface of how we can use AI to improve vastly that human-computer interaction in all kinds of ways. To not replace human decision-making, but augment it. So helpful AI, I think, is really the critical step to actually gaining human trust in intelligent systems. And that's going to be true in automotive as well. Before we get to full autonomy and replacing decision-making, let's find the ways that AI in the car can help human decision-making. And we're making progress there, but I do think we need to have more focus on those near-term practical steps. Has to be safe, and that's what really this Watson OpenScale is about, is evolving the methods and tools for how we develop AI to make sure that they are safe, robust, also ethical, so that they're free of bias, that there is discipline around how we manage the data that forms the basis of these intelligent systems, and how we have transparency in how they actually make decisions. So those are key steps to me in actually implementing AI in a practical way. And I have a couple other specific examples here, just from the IBM portfolio, but you can pick examples all through the industry of how we are implementing AI in very targeted, practical ways. Just before this talk, I was talking to one of the organizers about, like 8 or 9 years ago, we were starting to talk about Watson and IBM and applicability in automotive, and the actual sort of scenario we're talking about is, imagine pulling into the garage and your car is making a funny clunk clunk noise, and you kind of echo that back to the maintenance technician and hopefully help him diagnose what's wrong. Well, now we can actually apply AI to learn what normal vehicle sounds like and what typical patterns of failure actually sound like, so that when you roll into the shop, the car itself is already, through sort of acoustic machine learning, has already sort of diagnosed what the problem is. You could also do that with sensor data, of course, but acoustics in a very sort of cheap and pretty reliable way actually give us a nice way to sort of classify problems that arise in mechanical equipment like automobiles. So, here we are 7 or 8 years after that conversation about what could be, and we have that as a capability today. And we are working with some of the automotive manufacturers on testing that inside vehicles. Images is another way. Obviously we can use and are using images to help vehicles detect obstacles, stay within lanes and so on. We can also use visual image recognition during the manufacturing process, and we have a capability for doing that. So as the vehicle is being manufactured, you can use AI and image recognition to actually detect flaws during the manufacturing process and correct them very quickly. So very practical, narrowly focused artificial intelligence, helping improve the quality, helping improve human decision making around the vehicle, both in manufacturing and in operation. And these are just a couple of simple examples of how we can implement targeted AI today. So 12 months from now, there'll be even more great examples. 18 months from now, we are, as an industry, evolving these different applications of AI at a very rapid pace. But they're focused, they're narrow, they're not autonomous, they help augment human decision making. The last key thing is trustworthy AI, and I can't emphasize this enough. If we're going to avoid or alleviate a backlash against AI and autonomous systems, we have to help the public realize that those are trustworthy systems, that we're better off with than without. And whether we like it or not, we are going to get government legislation arising to help with that. And just hot off the presses yesterday, the European Commission announced actually the next step forward of a working group that already existed, basically codifying what trustworthy AI systems would do. And those are going to start to realize in legislation, at least in Europe, and if they legislate in Europe, you're going to see the impact of it around requirements such as how do they help, or how do we provide human agency and oversight on the AI's decision-making process? How do we ensure the robustness and safety of these systems? How do we ensure human right to privacy and appropriate governance of the data? How do we ensure that they're not biased? How do we ensure that they are contributing to the well-being of society and environment? I don't know how they're going to codify that one, but anyway, that's a nice goal. And how they're accountable. So accountability will certainly be a key part of that. And again, whether we like it or not, it will start to realize in legislation. So the last thing I wanted to sort of leave with was some notion of what are the different value propositions of AI in the vehicle? I've talked about self-healing, talked about socialization, learning is sort of obvious, self-driving we know, but self-configuring, how does the vehicle actually use AI to, to help customize and personalize the experience in the vehicle? Self-integrating, how does that vehicle system integrate with other systems, both roadway and parking and other transactional systems. So there are just a lot of different ways that we can use AI to change the human experience of driving. So that's all I had, and I wanted to thank you for attending today. Hopefully I give you a little bit to think about. I'll be around after for questions, so welcome anybody to come up and talk, and enjoy the conference.